Hello there. If you like truth, you'll like it here. Welcome. Story time. I was robbed at gunpoint. My testimony series. Full disclosure. This one is going to be a little hard to do, guys, so please bear with me. I remember I did not want to go into work that day. You hear that all the time with these kinds of stories, but it's true. From the moment I woke up, I did not want to go. What made me go was the fact that my calling off would have been last minute and would have inconvenienced other people. And I did not want to call off and leave my boss stranded, unable to find someone to work my shift, especially on a Saturday. I worked as a front desk clerk at a hotel, and Saturdays at hotels were usually pretty busy. So I didn't want to shrug off my responsibility onto someone else. With resolve, I determined that I would go into work. My shift started at 3 p.m. Before that, however, I had some shopping to do. I was shopping with my mom for a new computer. The computer was my college graduation gift from my mom. We went to a computer store, and after looking at every computer that was there, I finally settled on the perfect one. This was such an exciting time for me. I was excited to own my own computer, but keep in mind that this was many years ago, before people bought a new computer every hour. So I was excited that I would be going away to graduate school, and I was excited to be moving into my own apartment. There were so many great things happening in my life at that time. I truly could not have asked for more. I was having so much fun with my mom, shopping for a computer, that I didn't notice the time. By the time we had checked out, it was 2:30 p.m. I had 30 minutes to get to work, and I desperately did not want to go. Of the $1,000 I had been given towards my computer, I still had about $200 left over, so I wanted to shop some more. I wanted to go to lunch with my mom and talk about how great it would be to be living in my own apartment. Side note, by the grace of God, I had been given a 3-bedroom apartment for the price of a 1-bedroom. The realtor said I had gotten lucky and was given that deal because a 3-bedroom apartment was all that was left, whereas the 1-bedrooms had sold out. But I knew that it was a blessing from God. And now I wanted to shop some more and buy some nice new things for the new spacious apartment I would be moving into when school started. I wanted to go see a movie. I thought about going to see a friend, about hanging out at my grandmother's house and just chatting it up. I thought of everything I could be doing except working. I was on such a shopping buzz, and the last thing I wanted to do was end it by going to work. My shift was from 3 to 11 p.m. Coming from such an exciting day, I knew those would be some of the longest hours of my life. And boy, was I right. I had no idea how right I was about the long day I was about to have. Still, I went into work. We loaded my new computer into the back of my mom's truck so she could get it home safely, and I tucked the $200 down into the bottom of my purse. I pulled out a $5 bill and put it on top. The $5 would be for lunch while I was at work. Now y'all know this was many years ago because you cannot buy lunch anymore for $5. But anyway, when I got to work, it was 3 p.m. on the dot. I relieved the person who had worked the morning shift from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., and I set about my duties. I had been working as a hotel front desk clerk for 2 years while attending college, and I loved the job. It allowed me to do my classwork when the hotel wasn't busy, and because there were so few employees, I could always pick up extra shifts. It was not uncommon for me to work 50 or more hours per week while going to school full-time. As a matter of fact, I got more classwork done while at work than at home. When I first started my shift, some of my duties included checking the computer for incoming reservations, checking to make sure we had fresh towels, and counting the cash drawer. When I had done those duties, and a few others, I sat in the chair behind the desk and started to read a newspaper. At some point, it got a little chilly behind the desk, so I put on the jacket I usually pack to bring to work. On that particular day, I was not wearing my work shirt, but was wearing a cute little summer top that showed a bit of cleavage. Not a lot, and I didn't know it at the time, but having that jacket on and zipped all the way to the neck with my cleavage covered would become a potential blessing in disguise. About an hour after I had been at work, I noticed a person on the outside camera walking toward the front office where I was. As a general rule, I always kept the office doors locked until I saw a customer approach. I don't really know why I used to do this. I guess it made me feel safer. The hotel where I worked was a bit secluded. It was off the highway, with the hotel to the right and a neighborhood to the left. It also shared the same parking lot with another hotel. The other hotel was also owned by the same people, and it sat out front, while the hotel I worked at was housed behind it. People were always walking through the parking lot, either as a shortcut to get to the bordering neighborhood or just because, so I never really felt unsafe. Still, I used to lock those doors. Since I saw someone approaching, I stood up and looked through the window for a better view. It was the other front desk clerk from the hotel in front of my own, and she was walking very close with a young man. I unsnapped the lock that was located under the desk to let her and who I assumed was her boyfriend, because of how close they were walking, in. Then I stood behind the counter to wait for them to approach the desk. My coworker was indeed one of the people who approached the desk, but the other person was not her boyfriend. The other person was a masked man holding a gun to the back of her head and talking to me. I stood there in stunned silence, seeing it all, but as if not really being there, you know? I saw her standing there with a look of terror on her face, and I saw him pointing the gun at her, then at me. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard him say something to me, then point the gun at me. He was standing on the other side of the counter. She was standing beside him, and he was pointing the gun at my forehead and telling me to lock the door back. I did as he said, and he came around the counter with my coworker in tow and stood right beside me. He then yelled at me to give him all the money in the cash register. I opened the cash register and started taking out the money. My hands were shaking so bad, and I guess I wasn't moving fast enough, because he then placed the gun at the back of my head and said, "B, hurry up." Except he said the actual curse word. I know it doesn't make sense, but I remember wondering why he had called me a B. Like, in my mind, I was thinking it was so unnecessarily rude, When I had loaded the money in the bag, all while he kept the gun firmly pressed against the back of my head, he moved us over to the safe. I don't know how he knew there was a safe in the first place. Maybe he had just seen it as he stood behind me while I collected the money from the cash register for him, or maybe he'd already planned to try to get it. Whatever the case, he made my coworker and I try to unlock it. And when we nervously tried to explain that we didn't have the key, he put the gun to my head again and said, "B, stop playing with me." I said, "I swear to God, we don't have it." Again, I wondered why I'd said that. I never say "I swear to God." That was not something I had ever said before, but I said it then, and he dropped the gun from my head. He then made us try to figure out what the combination was. When that attempt failed, he grew even more frustrated with us and walked over to my purse, which was sitting next to the desk where I had been sitting just minutes before. He told me, "Give me all your money." I said, "I don't have any." And before he could raise that gun again, I said, "You can check if you want." Again, that was unusual. I did, in fact, have money. I had $200 at the bottom of my purse, and for the life of me, I do not know why I kept that from that robber. I knew then, and I know now, that $200 is not worth my life. And I realized that I should have willingly handed it over, but I didn't, and I don't know why. It was almost like someone else was speaking for me, guiding me along that terrible ordeal. After I told him I didn't have any money, he walked us back around the counter. He then told me to go back to where we had come from and grab a room key. I grabbed one, not stopping to think for a second what he wanted with it. He walked us into the hallway and towards the rooms. And that's when I panicked and started to wonder what he was going to do to us. If he brought us to one of those rooms, he could have R-worded us and or KILLED'd us, and no one would have known unless they had specifically checked those rooms. And that probably wouldn't have happened until the next morning when housekeeping showed up to clean the rooms. Even then, there were many rooms, so finding us that next day was no guarantee. We started to walk with him towards the rooms with my mind racing, when all of a sudden he turned around towards the stairs leading to the second floor and told us to run. It happened so quickly. He changed his mind and told us to run so suddenly that my first thought was that he was going to shoot us in the back. My coworker must have been thinking the same thing, because both she and I hesitantly began to walk away from him and towards the stairs. I guess we weren't moving fast enough, because the robber then shouted, "I said, run!" And we did. We ran as fast and as far as our legs could carry us. We ran up the stairs and away from the robber before he could shoot us, and before he could rechange his mind and take us into one of those rooms to do God only knows what to us. After we had run across the second floor of the hotel, we ran down the second flight of stairs, scared that he was still on the first floor waiting to kill us. We ran fast and slow, all at the same time, if that's even possible. On the one hand, we were trying to get away, and on the other hand, we wanted to make sure we gave him enough time to leave so we wouldn't run into him again. When we ran past the office, we saw that it was empty, so we ran inside and locked ourselves in there. And that's when we called the police. That's also when I lost it. By the grace of God, I had managed to keep it together while the armed robber was there. But when the reality set in and my mind processed what had just happened and what could have happened, my body began to shake and convulse so hard that I could not stand. I had to sit on the floor and hold myself in a tight ball. The police arrived and I was shaking so uncontrollably that I had to sit on the police car. I could not stand. I was convulsing uncontrollably and telling the police what had happened. I later found out that the situation was both much worse and much better than I had known. The situation was much worse than I knew, in that I found out later that day that in addition to the armed robber robbing the first hotel that day, before he walked my coworker over to me, he had also SA'd her. He had walked her over to the hotel to rob me after putting her through a far worse ordeal than what I had gone through. I thought back to what I had been wearing just minutes before the robber came. I'd had my cleavage out, and I've always had a pretty nice boob situation, for lack of a better way of saying it. I wondered if God had me cover up in that jacket so that I would not give the robber any actual ideas and invite further harm onto myself. I realized that what happened to her could have happened to me. I realized that that guy could have just as easily robbed my hotel first, thus inflicting that additional trauma onto me. My heart hurt for the young lady that had to go through that. Yet, ashamed for thinking it, I was also grateful that God had shielded me from it. As I said, because of what happened to my colleague at the adjacent hotel, the situation was worse than I thought. But the situation was also much better, indeed a blessing, in that, despite being shaken up during the whole ordeal, I had wanted to tell the armed robber that I knew he would not hurt me. Even as I tell y'all this story, I am trying to figure out the best words to use to express what I felt during that robbery. It was like I was encased in a bubble, although I knew, technically, that I was in harm's way. Although I knew technically that I was in harm's way, I also knew something that even the robber didn't know. I knew that he was not going to hurt me. I knew that he was not going to hurt me. I knew that he would not be allowed. And this is strange for a number of reasons. One of which is because I remember wondering to myself how many people had survived a gunshot wound to the head. Being a numbers girl, when that robber put the gun to my head the second time, I was literally trying to recall statistics on successfully surviving gunshot wounds to the head. So even as I was trying to encourage myself that others had survived a gunshot wound to the head, and that I possibly could survive it too, which means I must have been preparing myself to be shot. I was also feeling enclosed in a bubble, like the guy couldn't hurt me. I have shed so many tears after this trauma, but surprisingly, I only cry when I'm trying to explain that feeling of protection I felt, that feeling of being wrapped in a bubble that was so strong, so tangible, that I even wanted to share the news of it with the robber. To this day, so many years after being robbed at gunpoint, trying to verbalize that feeling still moves me to tears. And I am not a crier. The feeling was simply magical, supernatural. The next day at church, before the sermon even began, I burst into tears, like a big old baby. I mean, a full-on ugly cry. I was overwhelmed by the goodness of God. I imagine the devil expected me to renounce God, to question him, to doubt him. But what I did instead was thank him. I had never felt so protected in the midst of something so scary before. I remembered how I'd felt encased, enclosed, protected. I remembered how that armed robber had changed his mind, and instead of taking us into one of those rooms, had told us to run. It had happened so suddenly that I think it even shocked the robber. I don't think he intended to say those words. I firmly believe that God's grace and mercy flowed through that troubled young man and freed us from whatever evil he had intended for us. For years after this happened, I would randomly feel that gun pressed against the back of my head. It took years for the image and the feeling of that cold metal against the back of my head to go away. But even with all that, I remembered how God had protected me, spoken through me, covered me. I was never more in love with God than in that moment, and my heart filled with gratitude that not even 24 hours prior, I had been staring down the barrel of a gun and had lived to talk about it. I loved him so much, and the only way I could express it was through tears. I believe God saw my heart that day, and he understood my praise as I cried all the way through church that Sunday morning. Update: that armed robber was never caught. I pray that wherever he is, he has given his life to God. All right, y'all. That's been one of many testimonies I plan to share. I hope you guys will join me as I discuss more testimonies, mine and others, in my testimony series. Thank you guys for listening, and I hope it blesses you. Happy Easter. All right, y'all. That's it, and that's all. Hello there. If you like truth, you'll like it here. Welcome. If you don't, or if you believe in groupthink or bullying others into believing the popular opinion, then this isn't the place for you. So go ahead and just cancel me now. On this channel, we don't discuss my truth or your truth. We discuss the truth, and no topic is off limits. So, log in, like, subscribe, get comfy, and comment. It's nice to have you here. So let's talk.